Stanford University.
So you guys didn't have a chance to meet Dion last week. By the way, who's new? I didn't get to see before. Who wasn't here last week? Okay. All right, the rest of you, good. So Dion, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure, my name's Dion Almaer. I work with Ben on developer relations at Palm, and we've worked together for many years now. We founded a community site called ajaxian.com, which is all about the Ajax revolution when that happened, and basically doing web development. And then, as Connie mentioned before, we did a lot of work at Mozilla, and really obviously believe in the open web. And so with Palm on WebOS, we're hoping that the open web can kind of win in the battle on mobile. And we're really excited to talk about how the web can kind of get across all these different devices and such.
Cool. So how many of you think you would benefit from a primer on building web applications and how modern web applications are best constructed? Anyone feel like they would benefit from a run-through on that for the next few minutes? Okay, because basically what we had in mind for doing today was to just sort of run through with you the basics that would be the foundation for the rest of the stuff that we're going to talk about throughout the course for building web applications on mobile. Does anyone feel like that would just be horrendous and we should not do that and we should skip to more advanced materials? Does anyone just passionately feel that way? All right, so one guy in the front's going to be bored, but if you just pepper us maybe with some questions and stuff like that, that would help. So I think we'll do that. So what we're going to do today is spend the majority of our time in code, but I did want to frame what we're going to talk about for a few minutes. And I wanted to frame it with this slide. When you create a web application for normal web browsers, you have to worry about the browser landscape. And this slide sort of indicates sort of what that landscape is. There's a bunch of different browsers. IE has the majority share. It's actually diminishing. We did this slide I think 6 months ago, maybe longer. 6 to 9 months ago, and since that time, this E should be about 20%, maybe 10% smaller. IE market share is plummeting right now, and that's actually going primarily to Chrome, some to Firefox. The landscape's dynamically changing. But even amongst this landscape, each of these different browsers has differing share amongst the different versions. This is actually a chart that just came out, I think today or yesterday, that shows that Chrome does a really good job of pushing out updates, but IE, there isn't one IE in the marketplace right now. Safari's done a good job, but Firefox is pretty muddled.
This is the fun one, of course, the IE6 battle that web developers want to kill IE6, and even Microsoft helped out when a funeral was had in Colorado to kill IE6. Microsoft sent some packages hoping that it would die too. So they're trying to fight this as much as anyone else, I think.
So as a web developer, when you create an application, you sort of have to ask yourself, geez, what set of browsers do I want to support? And the trade-off is really just time. If you had infinite time, then you probably would try and do everything you can to capture all the browsers. But as you have less time to spend on debugging for different versions, then you have to sort of make some trade-offs. Another vector is compatibilities, feature set. What features do you want to support? But on mobile, it's a much simpler world because right now, as I mentioned last week, the major mobile platforms out there, the modern smartphone platforms, all have WebKit on them. And so really, while there are different versions of WebKit, and it's not as clean a compatibility story as in a perfect world, you really just need to focus on one browser. And so that's what we'll be talking about today, is just really web development in the context of WebKit. And what we thought it would be fun to do is just to sort of take you through a basic overview of the web stack. And to do that, let's just get started with some HTML. And I'll do that by just turning on Marion here. All right, so let's create a project here. Tutorial.
This is IntelliJ IDEA. Both Ben and I have kind of a Java background, and this is a fantastic Java IDE, but they also have great web support, and they have a web-only free product as well called Web IDE that's worth checking out. It does really nice completion of JavaScript and validates your HTML and things like that.
All right, so we want to just lay the foundation really quick. So you guys have probably all seen this. This is a web page. That's all there is to it. At the top, a lot of times you see weird, funky, like HTML version, Fuji, foo bar, strict, my
Some
uncle.
backslashes, a dash.
Uncle, But it turns out in modern web development, you really only need to do that. And so that's the only doc type you need to worry about. The others are legacy at this point. And HTML, the stuff that I wanted to focus on here is really just some basic concepts. So HTML, I just want to talk to you in about 5 to 10 minutes about the basic principles that you'll need to know as you do development. The first basic principle is that HTML is really just a way of creating blocks. Everything that you put in your web page is essentially wrapped in a block, and that's really it. That's really the only core piece that I want to tell you about. But actually, before I do that, let me just do one overview piece. So when you design your HTML, when HTML was first around, you just sort of mashed everything together in HTML. And that became your web page. And in modern HTML, really all you want to do is sort of introduce the building blocks of your application, and you want to theme those externally. This is an example of what's possible when you do that. This is something called CSS Zen Garden, where the HTML in all these pages hasn't changed at all. You just changed the CSS, this sort of separate file that governs how those building blocks in the HTML are styled. And if you follow this set of practices, then you're able to have tremendous flexibility in your HTML. And so really, the way that this is structured is you've got a website, as it were, this guy, and the clothes that the website wears is governed by CSS, and the functionality is controlled through JavaScript. And then the body of the person is HTML. So anyway, I don't know if that's an effective diagram, but. So the individual pieces in HTML, like I said, whenever you have content, like let's say the word hello world, it turns out this phrase hello world is wrapped in a box, and you use CSS to style it. And there's a few different ways to do that. Let's just introduce a little bit of CSS right now. And so CSS is all about finding something in the HTML and styling it. And we do that with something called a selector. And I'm going to put something called a div around this text. A div is just a way of actually creating a block. Now, even if I don't have something around hello world, it's implicitly in a block. But by putting the div around it, I have a way of referencing it from the CSS. And let's do that here. And now I can do something like change the color to blue. Usually get a little preview icon here. I guess we're going to have to. All right. So I can add additional blocks. And they're all styled. So what happens if you want to go in and address something individually? Let's say I only want the second hello world to be styled. This piece of CSS is called a selector. And it turns out you can do a lot of really powerful things with selectors to go in and reach in and style these individual blocks. So I can do nth child, and I can say that the second child of this block is going to be blue, but the rest aren't. And if I want to, I can also give explicit names. Like I can say that this block is going to be called foo. And with CSS, I can go through and just handpick that individual block and style it that way. So in HTML, you really just create these blocks and put them in the HTML. And then with CSS, you go through and you pick these individual blocks and you can style them. And in addition to styling, you can also govern layout.
Yeah. And you want to show classes as well?
Yeah, sure.
So
okay.
The difference between an ID, which is the hash foo, and a class is, obviously it's a grouping of things. So with an ID, you should only ever have one. It should be unique in the document, and it's normally better to use classes as well. You can get into weird problems if you're doing cross-browser stuff with IE, where the name of something can conflict with the ID of something, and so there's weird little bugs that JavaScript libraries that we'll talk about later kind of hide you away from, and you don't have to worry about in doing WebKit programming, but do appear elsewhere.
So class gives you a way to do multiple blocks. An ID can only be used across one block. So this piece right here, this selector, it turns out there's a ton of different features you can use to go in and grab these different blocks and format them. The other important thing to talk about is what's called the box model, because it turns out that these blocks that we've just put into the web page have different ways to format them. And I've got a slide here that illustrates that. Right after this guy. Right before that guy. So when you look at those individual blocks, even though we just see the text hello world, they're actually inside of a block. And then there's spacing around the inside called padding. And then there's a border that you can put around it, which can either be colored or can have different patterns. And then there's margin around that. So there's a couple of different places to put space. And so let's just play with this for a second. Well, let's do this across everything, yeah? So we can format the individual outline, and we can go inside the block too if we want to, change the color. Just lost my network connection. Change that to something besides red, maybe. So that's how you actually can format the box around it. And this piece right here that I showed you is what's called the box model. So when you hear people talk about the box model in HTML, it's just the set of rules that governs these blocks. So this is really all you basically need to know to get started with HTML. HTML is just this process of dealing with blocks, and there are other features of HTML that we'll talk about as we get through the course, but the fundamental building block of HTML is just these blocks. And when you see a lot of fancy images, like the CSS Zen Garden, these are, in many cases, just blocks that have background images set on them. So for example, in the CSS, you can go through, and I don't actually have a background image queued up, but you can say background image, URL, and you point to an image, and that image will go in the background. And so all of the formatting you see and animations that you can see, we'll talk more about where you position these blocks, but a lot of these effects are really just images that are put in the background of a block. So that's really most of what you'll be doing with HTML. CSS is just the act of finding that block and styling it. And you can do that either by ID or by position or by the type of the element or by these classes. And you have all kinds of interesting ways to point to this, and we'll talk more about those selectors. But now I think it would be interesting to talk about interactivity and adding some form of functionality. And that's where JavaScript comes in. So to do that, JavaScript is basically event-driven in a web application. And events are triggered by the user in some way. So let's say that you want to do something special when the user clicks on this particular block. So it turns out there's an event called onClick that's just baked into HTML. And all you have to do is just write onClick, and then inside of these quotes you can actually start writing code. Would it be a good idea to write the code there, do you think? Why wouldn't you write the code inside the quotes, those of you that have experience with HTML? What's that?
If you wanted to make a modification, you'd have to do it at every instance. It's much easier if you do it in a centralized location.
That's right. So the key to being a successful developer is laziness. And I'm sure you guys have been taught that by now. And it's like the right kind of laziness, but it's essentially ensuring that you limit the amount of manual labor that you have to go through as you maintain your application down the road. And so if I were to write here, that code does something. It's problematic, as this gentleman said, because as you start adding code and adding features, you'd have to hunt down all these individually. It's much easier to say, to write a function here, and then at the top of your file, actually do something there, and it's all centralized. You can go to one place. You can have multiple elements share that code just by calling into that same function, and so it's really much easier if you put all your code outside of the event handler. And so now I've said, okay, on click on that individual block, on that div. Div is just the standard HTML element, the commonly used HTML element for just creating a block explicitly around something. And on click, we're going to do something. And so here, what do we want to do? Do we want to just
Change the
let's
color
change
or something?
let's change the content. So this is a special keyword in JavaScript. We'll talk more about it. Dion's going to go into detail at length on this, I'm sure. And this keyword references that element. And so now in do something, all right, so there's this other key attribute, inner HTML, and that changes the HTML that's written inside of this element live. And so now when we run this guy, boom, I was clicked. So that's how you add JavaScript functionality to your web page. And that's really fundamentally basically it.
Do you want to show like positioning? And
Oh yeah,
floating
we
and
kind of, yeah, so that's another interesting point. Okay. So the other thing that CSS can do for you, we talked about styling. It's obviously not going to work. The other issue is that you may want to put these elements in a different position. And by default, HTML has a layout algorithm that's tuned for olden days for HTML's hypertext roots. And with CSS, you can change that on the fly. There's a couple of different ways you can change that. So one way you can change it is by nudging the block a little bit. And so you can say, okay, given where that block would have normally been, I just want to move it 10 pixels. I want to move the left of it 10 pixels over. And so if I do position relative left, you can see, boom, it's kind of nudged over. You can do something else. You can do absolute positioning. Now to do that, I'm going to go and do this rule here. Div nth child 2. So with absolute positioning, you can say, I'm going to position this guy somewhere specifically on the page. And so he's moved out. He's on top of this guy. So let's change his styling a little bit. And so he's been moved out of where he normally would have been entirely and positioned somewhere entirely different. And there are a few other positioning features too, like you can say position fixed. And if you say position fixed, then if I have to scroll, so that's some height here. If I have to scroll, if I'm fixed, then I stay in one position even when the user scrolls. All right.
Cool.
So I think we've covered.
Yeah, how about floating a couple? Float one to the right,
Okay.
clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. So you often do this if you want to have like, you know, a set of menu things that all line up together. You can still semantically use a list element, say in HTML, and you can just put this float on it, and it will just put them in a horizontal row rather than the default, which is just to kind of vertically stack these different divs together. So you can float left and right, and that kind of puts it into this relative mode that kind of takes it out of the flow and knocks it across. And you'll see ordering-wise, these are all called hello world, but if we kind of put numbers in there, it would kind of go in the opposite order. So if you want to just quickly so the first one floats across, and then they all kind of stack next to these different guys appropriately.
So the first time we did the first week's lecture, I think you actually were expressing some skepticism about whether or not you would technically feel comfortable with being able to write web-based applications in the class. now that we spent some time, is this helpful, this sort of introduction, or do you look at this and feel like, ooh, this is...
I feel like I was way farther behind than I actually am. All I really need to do is touch up on some JavaScript, and I think I have everything else down.
Fantastic. Okay. So really, one of the magical things about the web is there's not much to it. What we've shown you here is really simple, but this is pretty much, I think, as much of a solid foundation as you need to start building. Obviously, there's a lot more to talk about with JavaScript. Like, we could talk for a long time on JavaScript, but really, I think, and we'll get to more topics in JavaScript, but I think this basic pattern of the user triggers an event somewhere in your application, and you respond to that event here in your event handler, and then you modify the web page with some new dynamic content is a great start. And so some of the more advanced things we wanted to talk about were potentially Canvas, some of the HTML5 APIs, and kind of go into more depth there. Before we do that, are there any areas that you guys would like us to focus on for the next few minutes before we start to dive off in a few other different directions? Does anyone have any questions about what we've talked about so far? Yeah.
What's the preferred positioning mechanisms like? Because there's lots of different ways, and I've done website design before, but on a mobile device, is there like specific ones that work better, or is it all pretty much the same?
The great thing about mobile is you can cheat a lot more, right? Because you don't have to worry about IE and this, that, and the other.
True.
And so we find this a lot, like when we're doing mobile apps, like Ben and I worked on the Facebook app on Palm that you may have talked about, it was just like a nice sigh of relief to be able to just like literally cheat.
And then not have to
Yeah. And you can just like, so a lot of the times, like if you want to have rounded corners, it's a real pain in HTML. You have to cut things up. And exactly. And for us, we can just use this thing called border image that I can show if we can get online. And it's a very easy way. You do it once and it just kind of works. You can, because you've got the screen size limitation, you can often just kind of position things absolutely where you want. You can take a lot of different things that make it a lot easier for you to do this kind of stuff. There's also, this is an advanced thing, but there's another kind of layout model that came from Mozilla, because Mozilla uses their own technology to build Firefox, that's called Zool, and they have this really cool box model that allows you to position things, you know, I want this on the top, this on the left. And WebKit happens to implement that stuff too. So you can even use, you know, that's kind of more out there, but you can use this more application-based box model than web-based box model, which is kind of cool too.
So CSS has, one of the interesting things about CSS layout is that it sucks. Sorry, my internet, I have like this Verizon wireless card, but I'm not getting much signal here in the room, so it keep popping on and off. So CSS is great for styling these individual blocks that you put in the HTML. When you want to put them in different positions, I've shown you sort of the basic building blocks it gives you, which is like nudging in a specific position. Dion's talked about the Zool box model stuff, but you can also fall back to HTML tables, and you can fall back to, not fall back to so much, but you can actually use JavaScript for layout. And there's an increasingly large number of people doing this. Google actually uses this on their image search property. There's a bunch of other uses of it out in the wild. When you look at how other programming environments work, most of them use some sort of a layout manager. And it's pretty natural to do this in JavaScript too. And so a lot of people are doing it. jlayout.com is one example or one project. It's actually not the domain, it's this other URL. But if you Google jlayout, that's an interesting one I've seen recently. There are a bunch of others out there. When you look at table layout, like that's an issue of the trade-off. Like we were talking about CSS for skinning earlier. You really just, as a developer, have to make the right judgment call, because it's fantastic when you can create a property that's totally skinned through CSS and the HTML doesn't govern the appearance at all. That's fantastic when you can achieve it. But the whole reason why that's a desirable outcome is to make it easier for you as a developer to change the UI. And so if you find yourself spending hours and hours and hours of time trying to get something that you could achieve really easily through JavaScript or through tables, then just dive in and use that, would be my advice. Any other questions? All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is Canvas. So Canvas is a relatively new HTML feature. that gives you the ability to do dynamic graphics. So previous to Canvas, the only way you could do graphics is by using either an image tag to reference a pre-rendered image, like that, or you could use it in the CSS. As I showed you before, you could do background image. And I showed you that earlier. With Canvas, you can actually draw images yourself on the fly. And it's pretty cool. So to make it work, you typically give it an ID of some kind, so you can go out and grab it. I'm just going to say canvas here, and you give it the dimensions. Let's just create a 400 by 400 canvas. And now that we've done that, let me kill the rest of these styles since we no longer need them. One other thing I'm going to do, so the body of HTML by default has, I forget if it's margin or padding. I usually just kill both. Has some spacing around it. I just want to get rid of it and have our canvas flush against the upper left. And so now we have something blank because the canvas is white by default. Now I actually want to have a script draw something. So one of the first things I need to do is actually get that canvas. And so there's a function in HTML called getElementById. All right, a couple of concepts I want to explain really quick. First, this HTML that you have on your page is always available to you from JavaScript through this variable called document. So whenever your browser renders the web page, it parses that HTML and just makes it available to you. And there's a shortcut function here called getElementById. So you're basically saying you can traverse this entire HTML file, find the element that has an ID named canvas, and give me a reference to it. So you can start manipulating it. And you can do all kinds of stuff with it. In this case, I want to start drawing. And so the way Canvas works is you get something called the context. This is just steeped in CS tradition, the reason we do it this way. But you get the drawing context, which is the way that you draw on it. And because you could theoretically have other dimensions instead of 2D, you just have to say 2D. And in fact, the 3D stuff is implemented by having a 3D canvas there, so it's not theoretical, it used to be. And now that we have this context, we can actually do drawing on it. So first thing I want to do is actually draw a rectangle and remind me how I actually set the style on the canvas. Is it style? Fill style, right?
Yep.
Live on the fly in front of you. We're doing this for the first time, ladies and gentlemen. So see if Dion was right. Dion was not right. Oh, sorry. Now I have to execute the code. So we talked about events before. Oh, no. We talked about events before, and if we wanted to have it draw when the user clicked on the canvas, we'd do that. Now that's kind of interesting, but you might want to have the image draw before that. So it turns out there are other events that are not generated by the user, that are actually generated as part of the life cycle of your application. Like when your application starts up, one of them is when the page is fully loaded. And so when the page is fully loaded, I want to execute my draw function. How many people think it's going to work now? Anyone? Thank you, Connie. Thank you for the show of faith in the back. All right, so that's Canvas. So that's sort of a taste of how Canvas works, and then you can go through and do a bunch of different drawing operations here. Should I actually try and do like the Bestman thing really quick? Would that be interesting? So do we have internet access yet, by the way, or is that?
If we use this laptop.
If we use that laptop?
It's Windows.
Oh, jeez.
We can do it.
All right. All right, so and so there's a bunch of different drawing operations on Canvas. So Canvas is useful, like if you want to create a video game or something really dynamic, you can use Canvas. I did it to create a text editing component, and then Dion and I both turned that text editing component into something called Bestman, which is an online code editor, and we used it to we actually drew like a text editor here, like scroll bars and everything. And so we could go through and show you that process, but that's probably not the most interesting thing we could do right now. But you can do things like I don't know, fill text. There we go, fill text. And fill text takes the text first, right?
Text first, then next one.
10, 10. There you go. and context font. Remind me what the font style is? We'll look that up later, but you can set fonts on it too. I just forget exactly how you do that offhand. So that's Canvas, and Canvas is, again, really useful for doing dynamic effects, and I wanted to show you a Canvas animation framework that you might find useful. It's on a bookmark on my system, so let me just see if I can connect one more time really quick, and if not, we'll switch laptops. And then do you want to take over and talk about some of the JavaScript stuff that you had?
Yeah.
Okay. Did I lose my Verizon thing entirely? Oh, there we go.
Is it just slow?
It kind of comes and goes. It was working just earlier.
We have a wireless login.
Oh, awesome. Cool. Okay. I'll get that in just a second because I think this is actually, if this doesn't pop up, then we'll try it right now, actually. All right, so let me pull that guy out. So now I'm going to use the Stanford network. And the wireless guest, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Every 4 hours, wow. Nice. All right, thank you. So this is an example of the types of things. This is an animation framework that's built totally on Canvas. And this shows you the sorts of things that you can do. And what this does is it adds a very simple JavaScript layer on top of it. So it basically gives you these individual shapes, and it composites the shapes on top of the canvas and then adds dynamic functionality. This is something called, what is this called, hypermetrics. So you can either sort of build it on your own, or you can use a framework like this. Obviously, when you can use a framework to help you, it's preferred. And so Canvas can be enhanced to do some pretty cool things. Oh, they actually have you on there, Dion. That's kind of funny, Dion Almaer.
Oh.
That's funny. So that's Canvas. And
Yep.
do you want to?
Should we switch over?
Yep.
Yeah, now we've got network access. So a couple of little fun things to show that will stay in the CSS world quickly here. One is the border image thing that I just quickly mentioned before. You'll notice this preview over here. This is the CSS that it takes to get this rounded corner. And the way web devs designers have been wanting to do this forever. Normally you'd have to have different blocks for the top left, the top right. You'd have to make it scale. It'll be a real pain in the neck. And modern browsers give you the ability with this guy over here to specify just one image resource, so it's much better for performance too, and then you cut and slice it to tell you where exactly you want it to stretch. And so here I've actually got a tool that was done by someone in our group called Kevin Decker, that's just because we use these all the time in the Facebook app and the like, where you can just kind of put up an image, play around, and then manually change the offsets, and then you can just cut and paste the code. So you can just take one image that's kind of symmetrical, play around with it, and do interesting things. That's definitely something that, if you want to do these kind of look and feels, you want to play around with. Another one is just the 3D transforms that we use in a couple of different places, and I'll queue up some of these. So it's taking a little bit here. And then something kind of really fun over here. So this guy went and kind of took a bit of a snap at Flash, and he's built this kind of movie reel looking thing. It's a little bit bigger, and it's got audio going along with it. But this is just kind of like a fun little view that's using animations and the like, and is something you typically do in something like Flash. But he was able to do it just using pure CSS, and it kind of shows a little bit from what Ben was talking about. It's just all of the text is just text in HTML. And so he has different classes that he's going to use through JavaScript to kind of turn on and off. But this is the script of what's going on. And so, again, screen readers can read this, and so you have access to this stuff in an accessible way. And then using CSS, it can power it to do anything you want on the kind of look and feel side of things, which is pretty exciting. Another view of that is, this is the logo for a project at Mozilla called Raindrop. And this is the image of the logo. And this is the logo that he did from scratch in CSS. This is pure CSS with no assets at all. That he managed to recreate the logo. And here he's got like the different pieces and how he uses gradients and different things. And it's just kind of cool what you can do. We have a thing called Project Appetite. I'll turn on fancy mode with Control F. And then we have these different transforms that we're able to just put in with a couple of lines of CSS code that give you these different effects. And it's just cool stuff, really. Some of these are CSS 3, some are CSS 2.1, but most of it's CSS 3 stuff. There's a lot of animation that you can do, though, that doesn't go into the CSS world. A library that does this is called Scripty2, and it's the second version of a library called Scriptaculous, and all of this is being powered just by JavaScript and is highly interactive. And it's just, all of this work, all it's doing is just changing the CSS styles. So it's making widths bigger, and it's just adding a little bit of physics to do different things, and it's moving these things around. It's just taking the styles that we saw before and then changing those styles on the fly to give you these different effects. And so there's many different ways that you can get effects. You can get them through libraries like this, CSS itself, and then through Canvas that Ben showed before. Let's show something that kind of puts it all together, maybe. This puts together Ben's body, mind, and head for a little Twitter app. This is a site called JS Fiddle. It's a really cool place to kind of have a playground to just kind of play around with things. And it splits things up into the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript. And we've got a little kind of Twitter client, all in a few lines of code here. Here we've just got the HTML, which is just those areas where we're actually going to inject the information, and to begin with we're going to say we're loading, and we're going to replace that with the various tweets. Over here we've got the CSS, which is just styling these guys, and so we can go in and say we're going to make this, instead of groove, we'll make this say dotted, and we'll make it blue or what have you, and we'll rerun it, and then it'll go through and change it on the fly for us. And so we just do our different styling. And then over here, this example uses a library called YUI. There's a whole series of libraries that make life a lot easier for you in the browser land. And here he's using something else, which is actually really cool. It's called YQL from Yahoo. Yahoo has basically taken their search index and given you a query language to the entire web. And so you can write something that, if you're familiar with SQL for databases, you can use that same language and just query the web. Give me everything from Twitter, where the query starts from the user called Derek, and we can change this on the fly. And so this is amazing stuff for doing mashups across different services. And so you've got Twitter here, they've got Facebook, but they've also got Flickr for photos, searching the web itself, you name it, it's there. So you don't have to host the infrastructure, you can just use Twitter's. It's really cool stuff. So that's an example, put in like the HTML and the JavaScript and everything together. Another couple of fun demos before we get to JavaScript land are in the HTML5 video side of things. This is kind of showing what happens once the browsers really understand video. Get this load in here. What this guy's done, James Watson, is he's put together a full video player experience, all just using standard web technology. So it's kind of dark over here, but we've got a video playing. All of these controls are just HTML blocks, and as you do hit play, there's just a JavaScript API that says video.play, and it'll start playing the video. And then going full screen, giving the timing, all of this stuff is available for you, the JavaScript programmer. And so you can really kind of build this into your experiences.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
As the times are 0, 0.
Yeah. And then this one is going to be incredibly hard because it's so dark. But what this guy does is he shows using video and canvas together. I don't know if you can subtly see here. He's using like the Philips TVs, they have that amber light. What he's doing is every time the video is playing a frame, it gets passed to you in JavaScript. And using canvas, you can get the bitmap of all the colors. And so on the fly, he's able to get the colors that are on the screen as they're playing and spin out an amber light kind of property. So this again is just kind of like when you get into really advanced stuff, you can easily kind of integrate the HTML video stuff with the canvas stuff and put it together and do some pretty amazing experiences. On JavaScript itself, let's go to something basic to kind of get going. There's weirdness with JavaScript. JavaScript has a bit of a bad rap because at the beginning of the HTML world, it was known for more of that on-click, on-mouse over, do crazy things. But JavaScript, the language, is actually kind of nice. It's a dynamic language. The strangeness is in the scoping rules. So by default, you have this kind of scope when you're in a browser page, which is scoped to a window, which is a magic object that has a bunch of functions on it and a bunch of functionality. And if you didn't put this keyword var here and you just said like a equals 1, that's implicitly saying window.a equals 1. It's putting it onto the global scope. And a lot of pain is around doing that and not setting up the correct scoping. So you just got to watch out for it. Within here, though, what could be kind of weird to people a little bit is I've got this variable that's not scoped to the entire window. It's scoped to kind of my world, yet I still have access to it in a function. So when I did that alert B2, 3 came back. It added 1 to it. That's, again, is kind of weird. It's because of this notion of closures that JavaScript has, where when you have functions, they enclose the body around them. So if you think of this as being more like a body of work wrapped around, then what JavaScript can do is it can enclose the fact that it's got these different variables and pass it in. And this is actually incredibly powerful and enables you to not have to do kind of classic object-oriented programming. So what people often do when they first come to this, if they come in and they're taking Java courses or C++, they want to write using classical object-oriented stuff. JavaScript doesn't lean itself to that. It uses a notion of object-oriented called prototype-based object orientation. And what that means is there's a notion of an object class, and when you create a new object, you can do that using a literal by just using something that looks like a hash. I'll do this. That is actually creating an object called C, and it carries with it all of the properties that are available from the root object. And with this object C, there's a notion of a prototype. This is why it's called prototype-based. And basically, that's the object that represents the class that it is. So in this case, it's just the class object. And so this points to the parent, and any methods that it has, it will then just inherit. If I change this, and I said that the prototype maps to something like a cat, if I'd created that knows how to meow, then I could say meow, and it would work, because it would go up the chain to its parent and do things. And so there's a lot of stuff with this kind of different way of thinking about things if you haven't done prototype-based inheritance. If you're kind of more from the classical bent, there are libraries out there like Prototype, which we're actually in right now in this little world, where you can do the classic style, where you can kind of say cat equals class.extend, and then create an object that has a bunch of methods, and then if you want to extend something else, like an animal that you created earlier, you can do that. But people often come around, they try and like fit themselves into this classical object-oriented world, and they run into a bunch of stuff that's going on weirdly within that world. Like if you use Prototype, you'll notice you have to use this special super statement to get up to the superclass, and weird things happen. So I'd really highly recommend you kind of ignore that stuff and stay to more functional-based programming, which Java's really like. JavaScript is really like Lisp with C-like kind of semantics. So it looks like C and C++, but it's actually very different. A couple of other simple things that you want to do. This is to kind of show some of the libraries that are out there. There's a whole slew of libraries, and they all came about on the web because the web platform didn't give you what you really needed. So the native one of getting access to an element itself by its ID is this top one, document.getElementById, by ID, but you do that again and again. So a bunch of libraries gave you easier access to that. So there's this library called Prototype that's very popular. It's baked into our framework on WebOS right now that allows you to just say $. Jquery is another incredibly popular framework that gives you access through any selector you want. So this is why it's got the hash. You could also go in here and put in a particular class, and it's going to give you one or many of these elements back. And then there's a couple of other libraries, YUI, Dojo.ext. But what you'll see now is that they've all kind of converged, and they all have similar behavior. They just have different ways to say it. So this is just getting access to a particular ID, kind of brain dead. This is querying what's going on. So when Ben was writing those selectors in CSS, you can also do that through behavior by querying this guy. And there's query selector or query selector all to give you access to a whole slew of them. And so in some of these examples, we could have said, give us all of the fish that are in there. And then what you get back is a node for each fish. And you can say then fish.innerHTML, say I am eaten or what have you, and it would change that particular node and give you access to it. So you can quickly, instead of putting it in your CSS itself, you can dynamically add behavior to your entire site. And again, this is really popular right now. It's called progressive enhancement. It's where you can have a nice semantic HTML, simple CSS, and then you can add behavior on the fly to it. So that's selectors. And then often when you get access to these elements, you want to do different things to them. You want to set their styles differently, so change the colors, move them around. You want to change the data that's in there. You can do this through kind of the old inner HTML manner, or you can use these different library forms. And what these are doing, you might say, well, inner HTML is kind of obvious. These do a lot of hidden magic, again, that's mainly cross-browser. So it'll come through and it'll see a tag that it can't just inner HTML in. It'll build the DOM for you and insert it. So you really want to kind of pick one of these libraries. If you're a designer kind of person that wants to just sprinkle in some behavior, recommend jQuery. If you're more of a hardcore programmer that is going to write a lot of code, then you may want to look at Prototype. And then a bunch of others have different pros and cons. But this will give you access to do this different stuff. Let's see. There's also some other kind of fun side effects of the fact that JavaScript is very dynamic. Here's one simple example where what's going on here, you're using Prototype, and we're going to grab by the ID of A, so we're grabbing this div, and then based on a variable, it's going to run a different method. So if it's true, it's going to run that. If I do force and run it, it's not going to show up, it's going to hide it. You can do all of this kind of stuff on the fact that when you call methods on an object, so you've got an object, you can either call a method like this, or you can use it with a square brackets. And so this is where you can dynamically, even on the fly, do kind of metaprogramming to get access to what's going on within. And there's some pretty cool stuff that you can do there. Common mistake that people make sometimes is leaving off parens and wondering what happens. This will literally return the string of the function. Functions are first-class citizens in this language. If you do function foo and have it do something, that's exactly the same as writing this. Because functions are these first-class objects that you have access to. This is just syntactical sugar. And so then this again will show you that this has different scoping. I could in here put window.foo and attach it to the window, or I could put it on a cat that I created earlier and add new functionality on the fly. So I created this object earlier on the fly to this particular cat. I can give it magic abilities, or I can give those magic abilities to all of them by going to that prototype object, and now all of the cats suddenly are able to do something new. So it's highly dynamic, highly powerful language. And to really understand some of the craziness, you may want to check out the source of the actual libraries, like Prototype, Jquery. In a very little amount of source code, they add a lot, and it's kind of mind-bending, some of it. Let's see, what else should I put in here? This is a little just example of jQuery, and shows how easy it is to just add functionality to your page. You've got the same old little div, you've got your styling, and then on the fly, this will show the kind of chaining semantics that jQuery employs. It's going to do a selector to find any paragraphs that have the class of neat. It's going to dynamically on the fly add a class of oh my, and then it's going to show that, and it happens to have the notion of being able to do it slowly rather than just displaying it instantly. You'll see this a lot in jQuery, where you can just constantly be chaining these method calls together. And what they do is just they always kind of return this all the time at the end of their method, so you know you have access to what's going on next. Did I miss anything, Ben?
So again, our goal for this week is to give you a primer to HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, and sort of give you the foundational exposure you need. We're going to build on these in subsequent classes to show you how to do specific things. Any of you have any other questions that you might want to cover, or any concerns? One thing I was going to suggest that you might do this week is actually build a web page that does something interesting to you, maybe something that goes out and accesses YQL or something else. But as you contemplate doing that, anything else you want us to show you, any questions you have about how this stuff works?
Could you send us a link, like the text file with all those links? That's possible.
Yeah, totally.
Even
I
if
can
it's
get
not
it to.
very text file.
Yeah.
You just send that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, I'll get it to Connie, who can disperse.
Make sure you send me an email if you're not already receiving emails from me.
Okay. So next week, we're going to have a fancy pants HI guy come in.
You'll wear nice clothes.
Yeah.
You know?
Who's going
Maybe
to
a
talk
hat?
to you about like creative vision and like how to like make things look great and how to please your users and fluffy stuff. And then the week after that, we're going to start talking about how to take what we've really shown you that applies to the desktop and how that works in mobile. And what you're going to find is on mobile devices, it's the same set of skills, it's the same set of technologies, but you have different design factors that you employ to create your applications. And so building on this stuff, we're going to have a lot of fun. So thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.